Hi, this is Jeff Weigel. I'm the Sunday artist for The Phantom. I've been doing that for about 4.5, close to 5 years now. And I was asked to answer a few questions for this podcast. And so let's just get right down to it here. The first question regarding my journey to being a comic book artist. And I always loved comics when I was a kid. I grew up in the 60s and 70s. And I loved the Silver Age stuff quite a bit. And so I always wanted to be a comic book artist. I was inspired by a lot of those artists. And so my style sort of fits in with that school of thought on illustration. And as a result, I never really got any work from Marvel or DC, because by the time I had sort of gotten comfortable with working in the style of the people I admired most, that style was considered passé and out of style. Which is to say that in the 90s, when I approached comic book companies, they said I was too old-fashioned. I was told I was too Kurt Swan or Reed Crandall, those sorts of things. I always figured that was a good thing, but the comic book companies at the time disagreed. So I ended up, most of my career I spent as a graphic designer doing corporate graphics for things like logos and annual reports and advertising, things like that. And but I still really loved working on comics, and I wanted to do some. And I finally found a publisher called Big Bang Comics that thought I'd fit right in with their mission, which was to do an anthology-style book that sort of mimicked the styles of the Golden and Silver and some of the Bronze Age. And so I did work for them for many years, and they were published by Image Comics. I hooked up with them around about 95, 96. And after I'd worked for them for a while, I decided to try and get into children's books, and so I did a few children's books for publishers like Albert Whitman and Company in Chicago, and I've done work for Scholastic and HarperCollins and things like that. And but aside from kids' picture books, I really liked the comics medium, and so I went back to that and started doing graphic novels. And I've done a handful of graphic novels for publishers like that, Lerner Books and Anders McMeel. And then after doing that for a while, I was approached by Terry Beatty, who was my predecessor on the Phantom Sunday strip. Via Facebook, he contacted me. I think he got my name from a friend of mine who lives over in St. Louis named Rick Burchett. And he was looking for someone to replace him on the Phantom because his plate was a little too full, because he works on Rex Morgan MD at the same time. He does the dailies on the Sunday and the writing for that, and it was just too much for him to also do the Phantom. And so he was looking to pass the Phantom off to someone else, and he recommended a handful of different people to King Feature Syndicate as people who might be good to take over the Phantom Sunday strip. And they picked me out of the crowd, and I've been doing that job ever since. Oh, and in speaking about influences and favorite characters and things like that, I would be remiss if I did not mention Prince Valiant and what an inspiration Hal Foster and his work has been to me over decades and decades. Foster is still the guy that I go to when I'm trying to figure out how to draw water or draw some difficult thing that I've never had to tackle before. He's still the gold standards for comic artists as far as I'm concerned. I also really love Jose Luis Salinas' work on the Cisco Kid strip that he did in the 50s and 60s. And of course, Alex Raymond is a big favorite of mine too. Particularly Rip Kirby, his work on Rip Kirby, all that brush work that he did really taught me a lot and was really informative when I was learning to ink. And he's the guy that inspired me to pick up a brush instead of using pens. You've asked what my favorite superhero in comics is, and I was a Superman guy for a really long time. These days I'm tend more towards Captain America, actually. But you know, I've actually been a guy who followed artists more than characters, and generally I always think that the books are really only as good as whoever's working on them at the time. And so my books tended to be the ones, my favorite books tended to be the ones that my favorite artists worked on. In the late 60s and early 70s, I followed Neil Adams from book to book. And so my favorites would be Green Arrow when he was working on Green Arrow, or Batman when he was working on Batman. But these days, I really like the sort of heart that the writers are bringing to Captain America these days, especially as he appears in the movies. Now, you ask what I think of Indian comics, and I'm sorry to say, I don't know that I've ever been exposed to Indian comics. It's not something that's readily available over here in the United States, and you know, I really don't know anything about your comic scene at all, or what the current styles are over there. So I don't have much of an answer for that question, because I just haven't been exposed to Indian comics at all that I can think of. I can't think of a single Indian comic that I've crossed paths with over the years. So I hope you guys are doing wonderful work over there, but unfortunately, in the United States, we don't have much access to it. Your next question involves showing you some of my work. And so what I thought I'd do is I'd walk you through the process of how I do a Phantom Sunday strip. First off, I get a script from Tony DePaul, and it's very much like a movie script with the dialogue outlined and short descriptions of what should be depicted in each panel that goes with the dialogue. And from that, then I will do a little thumbnail to plan out what it is I'm going to illustrate and make decisions about, you know, whether I have a close-up or a medium shot, or whether it's a bird's eye view of any given scene. And my little thumbnail sketches, my little planning sketches are very sketchy. They're very rough because they're just for me. Here's an example of one from a strip a while back. And you can see it's very crudely drawn. It's just enough information for me to figure out how I want to tell the story, and where I'm going to place figures, what the camera angles are, things like that. So, it's nothing to write home about. The next step after that is to actually do the rough pencil version. And I usually do that on a piece of 11 by 17 plain paper that comes out of like copier paper. And you can see this is one of those pencil roughs. And it pretty much firms up all the plans that I made in the thumbnail sketch that I showed you a second ago. And this is where I establish all the anatomy as clearly as I can, and the compositions of the shots, things like that. And then after that, I'll take this and I will scan it into my computer, and in a program called InDesign, I will add the word balloons. And when I do that, I may find that I didn't leave quite enough room for all the dialogue that was written, or I may decide to tilt the composition a little bit, and I can do those things in Photoshop. And then I adjust any drawing size or things like that to accommodate adding the word balloons, which is all done in computer. I'm not a letterer at all. In fact, I'm a very poor letterer. And so thank God for modern technology, because it allows me to use programs and fonts to give the strip a professional lettering look. And after that's done, then I will take that and print the whole thing on Bristol board, like professional grade artists Bristol board, a heavier paper, and I print the word balloons and the panel borders in black, and I will print the pencil art that you saw here in the document in very light blue, like non-repro blue. And then I'll use that to ink over it. And the result of that is you can see that the originals that I work on are larger than that 11 by 17 that I showed you. Here's the pencil size. And this is the finished size. So I print this out on 2 pieces of Bristol board. and put them together, hinge them together with masking tape. And the reason I do it in two pieces is because a sheet this size doesn't fit in my office printer. So I have to print it first one side and then the other, and then lace them together with tape on the back so that I have a big enough drawing surface that I'm comfortable actually inking on it. And this is about 165% of what size the syndicate asks me to do the artwork, which is a finished file, a finished colored electronic file is supposed to be 14 inches wide. This is considerably more than that. This is about, I don't know, 20 inches wide. And this is where I really pay attention to the detail of inking. And we'll just get in here close and you can see most of it is done with a brush. Some of it's done with a pen, but mostly I like to ink with a brush. See, there's the word balloons. Those were generated in the computer and actually printed right on the page, so I didn't have to ink those. And the title panel here is also printed directly on the paper with the word balloons in black. That's something that I do when I first start the strip, but it's the same title panel with each beginning panel and in a storyline, and so that just gets printed right on the page. In the old days they just would have photostated this and put it on, but now with present technology I print it right on the paper. And this hopefully gives you a good, clear, big indication of my inking and brush style for the strip. And after that's done, then I take that black and white artwork, and you can see the scanner right back here. I'll scan it in two pieces and then lace those two pieces together in Photoshop using a feature that they have in there that takes two things and finds common areas, and then we'll actually blend those two images into one very easily. And that's when I start adding color. And I add color in the computer. I usually do the flat color in Manga Studios. I have an older version of that. It's called something different these days. Clip Studio, I think. And but I have an older version that's still Manga Studio. And I do all the flat color areas that way because that's built very efficiently to do that job. And then I will, once all the color's laid in place but still fairly flat, I'll take it into Photoshop and I'll do some of the more elaborate lighting effects, because Photoshop is better at that sort of thing, it seems to me, than Manga Studio is. And also in Photoshop, I can work in CMYK mode, which aligns with the colors that the printer's ink actually uses: cyan, magenta, yellow, and black. And so I get more accurate results, and I don't have oversaturated colors that way. That I might accidentally get if I were working in RGB mode. I hope that's not too technical for you guys, but a lot of you artists who deal with this will know what I'm talking about with the CMYK and RGB. And at that point, the strip's all done. It prints out in full color like this. And then I send it off to the syndicate, and it appears in newspapers around the world. About 6 months later, I've worked to get to 6 months ahead of publication date, which is farther ahead than the syndicate asks, but I just like to have that cushion in case I ever have to take a little time off, or if anything comes up that keeps me away from the drawing board for a while, nobody gets jammed up about deadlines. So I'm a good distance ahead of where I need to be on the Phantom at any given time, so that I never miss a deadline. And lastly, I'd like to talk directly to you Phantom fans. You guys have been so supportive of my work ever since I took over on Sunday Phantom. And I want you to know that I really appreciate that. I very seldom get anything but compliments on on what you guys see. That's very gratifying. It's important to me that, well, my job is to keep you happy, right? You're supposed to love this strip. You've loved it all your lives, and I want to make sure that you continue to love it. And so I try every week to do my very best to make sure that I fulfill whatever hopes you might have for this strip. I hope I continue to do that. I do get criticisms every once in a while on the message board on the King Features Syndicate website. And when that happens, I take those criticisms serious and don't disregard them. A lot of times you guys have given me direction on that message board that I've taken to heart. Things about how I depicted Diana, for instance. Made me work a little bit harder to try and figure out who she is and what she should look like. Things like that. And I want you to know that I'm thinking about you guys every time when I sit down to work on this strip. That I really appreciate your support, and that my biggest goal is to make sure that you guys are happy with the way I'm treating your favorite character. I grew up with the Phantom. He was in my daily newspaper when I was a kid. So I read him ever since I learned to read and could open a newspaper. Back during the Cy Berry days, and Cy Berry's a big influence on me these days too. He set a real high bar for this strip, and I try and meet that every week with the work that I do. I like to think I'm carrying on his tradition and his standards. And one other thing is that a lot over the years, characters can evolve and change, sometimes for the better and sometimes for the worse too. There have been a lot of the comic book characters that I loved as a kid that have been treated very poorly, in my opinion, and I don't recognize them anymore. And that always makes me a little bit sad. And one of the things that I really appreciate when I took over the Phantom strip, it was that the Phantom is still the same guy that I grew up with some 50, 60 years ago. And I like that about him, and I think you guys do too. Your loyalty has been with the Phantom for so long, and I always say that I'm in charge of a very important intellectual property these days. I always compare it to borrowing somebody's toy collection. I'm in charge of your toy collection. You guys love the Phantom, and I've been put in charge of taking care of that property, that character. And I make a promise to you that I will never ruin your character the way so many of the characters that I loved have been ruined over the years. I'm going to do my very best to be a responsible caretaker for the Ghost Who Walks. And if you don't like what I'm doing, I hope to hear about it. And if you do, I hope to hear about that too. But you're really the audience that I'm trying to please, and I'm very sympathetic to your affection for this character, and I plan to make sure that affection is maintained. And so I thank you guys for your support, and here's to another 85 years of the Phantom. I won't be in charge of all of it, but I plan to stick around for as long as I can. And I hope you're happy about that. I know I am. Thanks for listening, and thanks for being interested enough to want to talk with me. So long.